everyone. My name is Sabrina Gosby. I'm a public health student at MAU. I'm currently a sophomore, and this is my presentation on gun violence in the US with prevalence and prevention methods. So specifically, this was my research question, which is what is the prevalence and possible prevention of gun violence in the US? And the reason I chose this topic was because of the recent school shootings that have been over the last couple of years. And they have affected me personally because my high school actually had a threat of a shooting. And I never thought it would happen to my high school because it was a pretty small school. However, it was still really scary. And although it never did happen, thank goodness, it's terrifying to watch this happen every day. So I decided to research about possible, like how prevalent it is in the US and then possible prevention of gun violence in the US. So for the introduction, within the US, gun violence has attributed to more than 32,000 deaths and 67,000 injuries in 2020 alone, with the death rate from firearms being 11.4 times higher than other high-income countries. And typically, for those under age 25, gun violence is the leading cause of death, not cancer, car crashes, anything like that. It is unfortunately firearms. And then with other high-income countries having significantly lower rates of death by firearms, the US needs a drastic change. And then another important thing to note is that since 1968, more people in the US have died from gun violence than in the wars that the US has been a part of since the Revolutionary War, which is crazy to think about because there has been a lot of wars and many people have died. And the fact that the death rate for firearms is higher than that is shocking. And then this is the epidemiology. So the epidemiology for this is the prevalence of gun violence among different states. And it was often dependent on gun legislation. So for example, the states that had less strict gun laws often had higher incidences of gun violence. Like Mississippi had 28.6 deaths per 100,000 people, in Louisiana at 26.2 deaths per 100,000 people. In contrast, states with stricter gun laws, such as California, had less incidences of shootings. So they didn't allow for open carry and just stricter laws overall. So they had less incidences with that. And then continuing on, while gun violence can affect everyone, some populations are disproportionately affected. Black men are 10 times more likely to die from gun violence than white men. And those who experience unemployment, have low socioeconomic status, or live in unsafe neighborhoods are more likely to experience gun violence than those who live in nicer neighborhoods or have higher socioeconomic status. And then additionally, among Hispanic and white men around ages 15 to 34, gun violence was the second leading cause of death. So for possible solutions, this one was the most interesting one that I found. It's called the Cure Violence Model. And it's really interesting because it works by identifying those at risk, which are typically young children, or not young children, but adolescents and young adults. And then it also interrupts those that are already committing violence. And then it also works to change community behaviors. And it is really interesting to me because they use something called a violence interrupter, which is an adult with a past criminal background. And they use them as a mentor for those who are at risk for committing gun violence in their future. And they create a bond because they have similar backgrounds. They often come from similar neighborhoods. And since they're able to create that bond and that trust, then they are more likely to listen to their mentor, and they won't perpetrate gun violence in the future. And then for the community level, the Cure Violence Model works to change community views by providing education on proper gun storage, proper gun safety, and then also teaching about how dangerous gun violence can be. Next is with the changes with the judicial system. For example, in the Rhode Island Superior Court, they were able to reduce the processing time for a gun violence case by half by only exclusively hearing gun violence cases. And then additionally, the Jefferson County Gun Court program was able to significantly reduce criminal behavior by mandating a boot camp for first-time offenders, providing alcohol and drug rehabilitation, and then also mandating parental counseling as well. And then, as I said before, they were able to significantly reduce criminal behavior in comparison to other gun violence offenders. And then continuing on with background checks. This background checks is a popular method or popular topic for solving gun violence in America. However, there are loopholes with a lot of background checks, which makes it appear to be ineffective. However, with extended background checks beyond federal law, then we would be able to prevent those loopholes and then stop criminals and those with history of violence from purchasing firearms. Currently, around 22% of gun owners purchased their most recent gun without a background check, and 45% of gun owners who purchased a gun online in the past 2 years did not receive a background check at all. So with those, appears to be more loopholes with online purchasing. So if we were able to extend background checks online, then we could prevent gun violence in the future. So the final takeaway message is that it is really important for the children to get the proper education about gun violence, so that way they don't end up committing gun violence in the future. And then it is also important that they get a mentor for those that are at risk, so that way they can have someone to trust and someone that they can learn their experiences from. And then overall, it's important because we need to protect their lives and not the guns. So, and then these are my references. And then additionally, I wanted to say something that was really interesting was the writing and with the sources. It was a little bit difficult for me to find sources that were up to date, but eventually I was able to find sources that were both reliable and up to date. And then the writing was also really interesting with finding the interventions and solutions, and then chunking it into 3 different papers was really beneficial as well. Thank you.